Hello everyone, I am Lori Seibel, President and CEO of the Community Health Endowment, and thank you for joining us today. We are so excited about this conversation. In fact, we have been overwhelmed with individuals who want to be part of it today, and so we thank you for being willing to talk about such an important topic. Frankly, we're not really surprised. This topic is rapidly growing in interest, not only by parents, by schools, by mental and medical health professionals, but in fact by the youth themselves. Just think about how much time our youth spend observing the lives and images of other people. People that we don't know, people we may never meet. The constant comparisons, the hits to our youth's self-esteem, the constant scanning and addictive behavior that phones bring. Can we reverse this? Can we change this? And if so, what can we do to make that happen? You know, Dr. Vivek Murthy was recently in Lincoln as the U.S. Surgeon General, and he challenged us. He really put forward a call of action for us to begin to address this issue in very clear and concise and intentional ways. And so we're going to start talking and continuing that conversation today with a group of folks who I know you will find to be incredibly informative about this topic. I am going to introduce you to our moderator for today's event, Dr. Angela Palmer-Wackerly. She is a professor at the university. She specializes in health communication and health equity. And she is going to take us through this topic not only from a professional point of view, but also as a personal one. And so thank you all for being here today, and we look forward to this important conversation.
Thank you so much, Lori. Well, first of all, I want to thank everyone at Community Health Endowment of Lincoln for putting together this very important event. Very excited to be here, as I know my panelists are as well. So I just wanted to give a little bit of information about the logistics of this event. So first of all, thank you to everyone joining us on Zoom today. We're very excited to have you. So we're going to have this event as a conversation. And so I'm going to ask a series of questions, and the panelists are going to answer them, but then also they may jump in with other thoughts, questions, and ideas related to this important topic. At any time, folks on Zoom can write questions in, and we will have a Q&A section at the end of this conversation, and folks will bring that up to me so that we can be sure to address some of the questions from the audience. So thank you so much. So as Lori said, this topic has been important for quite a while now, right? So I've been at UNL for 9 years, and it was about 8 years ago that when I was teaching one of my health communication courses, and so just for a very simplistic definition, health communication is the ways that we seek, process, and share health information. And so it was in one of these classes where one of my students said, would you ever consider teaching a class just on mental health communication? And so I really started to notice that students wanted to talk more specifically about anxiety and depression a lot of the time, and consistently related to social media. And so I did create that class, and I've been teaching that class now for 6 years. And so, but from a personal viewpoint, I'm also the mother of a 10-year-old boy, and so I see the ways that he is already asking me if he could have a public YouTube channel because he wants to increase his likes. And so there are things that I'm considering, my husband are considering, that we're navigating just as other parents out there are. And so I'm trying to balance the research with what I'm seeing in person. So very excited to hear from our panelists about that too as I navigate that. And so I just want to introduce our panelists. First, very excited to have Julio Ramirez here with us today. He has recently graduated from North Star High School and will be starting a full-time job at Duncan Aviation on July 1st. Very excited to have you. And so he's going to talk to us a bit about his experiences with himself, with his family, and then also LPS's policy with the no cell phones this past year. But then also he was part of the roundtable discussion when Dr. Murthy visited here in Lincoln in April, and he participated in that focus group at North Star High School. So thank you so much for being here. And then we're also excited to have Dr. Phil Boucher, who is the owner of the Frontier Pediatric Care Practice here in Lincoln. He's been here practicing pediatrics for 10 years. I mean, he also is an advocate for youth mental health, and he has an active Instagram, which he helps educate parents on issues of youth mental health. So thank you so much for being here today, too. Okay, so when Dr. Murthy was here, he stated that social media is a driver in youth mental health. So I'll ask each of you what your thoughts are on this. And Julio, I wanted to start with you since you participated in the focus group with Dr. Murthy. So what are your thoughts based on your experiences and your conversation with other high school students about this topic?
Great question. I think most students can attest to the fact that social media makes a wanting for other people's lives. And social media isn't a bad thing. I mean, before, I don't know about your guys' time, but it was a paper and calling on a phone that had dials on it. Now we can communicate in a much more efficient way, but that comes to the fact that kids are looking at other people with kind of a jealousy, a anger of what they have and what they don't have. And I think social media shouldn't be given to kids at such a young age to where they're wanting everything. A middle schooler who wants all these new iPhones and everything, just to not use it as the tool that it's intended for, which is to learn, but to use it as something to grow anger and jealousy and depression over about, isn't okay. And I think most high schoolers have shown that behavior with seeing other people's social media accounts.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so I understand, right, that your parents, so you have an older sister, and your parents had given her a smartphone and then decided for you that that was not the best way to go about things after they had seen how it affected her. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So my sister, her mom had left at a very young age, and the reason my parents gave her the phone intentionally was to communicate with her mother. And instead, she used that for social media purposes, and that social media created outlash between her and my parents, kind of a friction, and it also caused her to be quite depressed and angry with other people's lives and how other people had different access to things, or how other parents would let them do things and how she couldn't do that. And my parents saw that and decided then and there that we shouldn't get cell phones at the age of 10 or 5th grade. So we didn't have cell phones all throughout elementary, which was something we didn't like. We argued with our parents constantly. We didn't see the good that they were doing, which was we weren't on electronics all the time. We weren't looking at other people's lives with such ambition and jealousy. We did get a phone 6th grade year, and it was a flip phone. Which I'm very good at, the 2-bit texting. I love that.
That's how we grew up.
Exactly.
The flip phone was a great introductory period to using cellular devices. All you needed on it was calling and texting was something that I did with people to talk about things, not to be mad or jealous about what they were doing or seeing what they were doing. It was just talking about how they were doing or having meaningful conversations with people. When I did get my first smartphone, it was freshman year, and when I got the smartphone, it was an introductory period to everything. I mean, I didn't get all social media apps right off the bat. I had Instagram, then I got Snapchat, then it became to the point where they thought I was efficient enough to use this on my own terms. And even then, I still find myself struggling with social media of I'm staring on it too much, I'm scrolling too much. So there is things on my phone that create timers or self-awareness checks where like, oh, it's been an hour and I've been scrolling. I need to stop. I need to go outside. I need to do something productive with my day. And my parents have always been helpful with self-esteem. I mean, your kids are using these phones to look at other people's lives, but you should be looking at your own life with the same intent of, oh, my life is great. I'm doing stuff with my life. So parents should also at the same time be advocating for their kids' self-esteem and health and be checking on them. I mean, if you give your kid a tool that looks at everybody's lives, you're going to have to see at one point they're going to find someone else's life that they think is better.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And so, Dr. Boucher, from a medical perspective, how is the mental health of your patients impacted by social media? And then can you share some recommendations regarding social media for parents or guardians?
Sure. I think the mental health crisis in our country, especially in our youth, is just on fire at this moment. I mean, it hasn't been a worse time to be a teen than right now in the United States. And even before the pandemic, there was so many mental health issues that we were all facing, especially when it comes to anxiety and depression and self-harm. The pandemic certainly made that worse, especially with loneliness and just not being able to connect. And then people turn to their devices because what else are you going to do when you can't leave home? And I think what we've seen just since the advent of these technologies, which, you know, going back to you, Julio, talking about, you know, the texting, like the 2-bit text messaging and all those sorts of things. When I was an 8th grader in 1998-ish, AOL Instant Messenger came out. So I don't know if, you know, people watching remember AOL Instant Messenger, where you had to log in and you had to do the dial-up and all those things, and you could chat with people, but then at some point you had to unplug because somebody needed to use the phone or you had to go do something else. It didn't interfere with our lives, and it didn't have such a hold on us because we weren't constantly getting notifications. I remember one time I wanted to know when a friend of mine was getting on AOL Instant Messenger, so I turned the speaker all the way up, because back in the day, you had one computer in the basement, and then you had to, like, you know, go about the house and everything like that. So I turned the speaker all the way up so I could hear when they got online, and it broke the speaker because I turned it up so loud. Otherwise, you weren't constantly tethered to your device, and you weren't constantly getting notified. And I think what has happened is it's become so ubiquitous that screens are a part of everyday life. When you were talking about the envy and the jealousy and people seeing other things, that starts way before you get your phone, when you're watching the unboxing videos of the kids on YouTube, like playing with toys and all those sorts of things. We have allowed it to just permeate every aspect of our lives. And what we see then is we see kids that grow up and they miss out on going outdoors. They miss out on risky play. They miss out on so many different opportunities because screens have filled that gap, and they're not seeking, they're not bored, because they can always just turn and get that dopamine rush, get that hit of you know, seeing what's going on the internet so readily and so easily. And so I think when we look at mental health, depression, anxiety, self-harm, eating disorders have all risen, not just because of screens. It's not that screens caused all of these things, but it certainly poured gasoline on the mental health emergency that we were facing before the pandemic, and that's only worsened in that time. When I think about how do I help families when they're trying to figure out how to navigate this as their child grows, it's really tricky, because for one, everyone's friends are doing something different, and so you're going to be the holdout that doesn't let your child have an iPhone or something along those lines. And then you don't want your child, like as a parent, you don't want your child to miss out or feel different in that way. So what I've been telling parents, I started as a pediatrician here in Lincoln 10 years ago, and about 8 years ago, Apple came out with the screen time settings, where you could see how many hours they spend per day on their phone and all those sorts of things. So at summer physicals, what I always do is I have them get their phone out and open up their screen time settings and show me how many hours per day that they're spending on their phone. And kids are actually surprisingly happy to just turn that over and show it. If it's less than 6, they get a high five, because they're not using their phones that much. 6 hours per day. Because on average, what I see when I have them pull out their phones is just on their phone, not taking into consideration their computer, their tablet, or the TV that they're watching. They're usually 7 or 8 hours per day on screens. And so if they're under 6 hours, I'm like, wow, what are you doing? Like, how can I get the patients in the room down the hall to do what you're doing? Because you're spending less than 6 hours per day on your phone. You must be doing something intentional about that. And so what I have parents do is set a reasonable goal of how we're going to turn that down to 5 hours per day, or turn that down to 4 hours per day, and slowly move that. And one of the things that I think has really helped me in those conversations is talking with the teen or the adolescent or the 10-year-old, you know, preteen, wherever it might be. How does it feel when you're on your phone for a long time? Because as adults, we know how it feels. And as teens and young adults, we know how it feels when we're on our phones for too long. And when we let our kids on their iPads or on their Nintendo Switch too long, like, you can tell, okay, you've had too much time. We can sense that and feel that, and the teens can feel that too. But often it's, how do I decrease the amount of time that I'm spending? And it's a really hard thing for teens to do for themselves, and it's hard for parents to know how to help. And so the 3 things that I tell them, because I think if you're telling them a bunch of things, there's really only 3 things that I communicate to them as, here's where to start. One is no screens in bedrooms. If we're using our screens in an area of the house where they can be monitored, we're going to be using them less because there's just not as many opportunities to use them in the living room or the kitchen or the dining room table or wherever it might be. So no screens in bedrooms. One, because it interferes with sleep. And two, because you're able to communicate in ways or do things or say things online that you wouldn't otherwise if there is the possibility that somebody might be looking over your shoulder. So no screens in bedrooms. Two is we use them in public areas of our house, and the bigger the screen, the better. And so if you're on your iPhone, it's really easy to have that little conversation and do what you want to do on your phone. But if you're on an iPad, computer, or tablet, it really limits the trouble that you can get into on those devices. And then the third is we are intentional about our screen time settings and how many hours per day we're allotted. And so I try, and wherever they're at, I'm not going to say, okay, you can't, you do 6 hours per day on your phone. No more phone. That's not going to work. But can we try next week for 5 hours per day? And then can we try the next week after that for 4 hours per day and work our way down? And a lot of parents get stuck on the technology piece of it. My kid is so smart. They know how to get around it. They do know how to get around it. If you look at all the Chromebooks at school and everything like that, like they figure out how to get past all of those different barriers that we put up. But I really like the settings on the Android and the Apple where you can go in and you can set screen time settings where after so many hours you can't use that app anymore and you can't access whatever it might be. It might be Instagram or TikTok or Snapchat. You can say, okay, you get an hour per day of Snapchat, and then after that you run out of time. And if you do that, if you set a password that the child doesn't know, then they're locked out after that and they have to figure out somewhere else to get on or move on with their day. And I've actually talked with a lot of teens, and I do this myself. It's kind of a relief when you run out of time because then okay, I'm done with it. Like I don't have a way to get on Instagram or TikTok or wherever it might be. I'm going to have to go do something else. And so when I talk with teens about that afterwards, they do feel like, okay, yeah, I don't really need to spend 3 hours per day on TikTok. 1 hour per day on TikTok is enough for me, and then I can move on and know that things will be there when I come back. And so those are the kind of places that I start with teens that are wanting to decrease their screen time settings because they're seeing the negative impacts on their anxiety, depression, self-harm, their thoughts about themselves, their thoughts about others. It's a huge problem, and I think these little intentional hacks that you can put in place can help to improve things.
Thank you for sharing that. And so then I'm curious, Julio, so based on these recommendations, practically, how do you see kids reacting to these recommendations that parents put in place, or perhaps you see parents not putting these in place? Just curious about your experience.
Well, like I said with him about the phone policy at LPS, there's no matter what change you put on kids, there's always going to be rebellion. When you have something at such a young age and you grow up with it, if you change it all of a sudden, no one's going to take a liking to that, even adults. So when we do put that change, parents need to have their foots down on it. And if they don't have their foots down on it and kids get around them, then kids grow this kind of personality that whatever they want is okay. And the world is the way they want it. That's not an okay personality or thought to have. I think with using these hacks, as you said, is a great way, but parents need to put their foot down. And we learn from our parents. So parents need to, if they're going to do that to us, they need to do it to themselves, If there's no phones at dinner time, then the parents can't get on the phone at dinner time. We're learning from them. We're observing from a young age. So they need to also be putting recommendations and limits on themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's huge. And I think that makes such a big difference when, as parents, we're modeling the active things that we're doing and how it makes us feel. Oh, I was on my phone too long and I'm just feeling really distracted and overwhelmed and I need to just put my phone away. I'm going to put it in a drawer and go outside. If you can kind of say those things and illustrate why you're doing it and what you're doing, your child will pick up on that. And if you're saying no screens at the dinner table, like you said, then you also need to not have screens at the dinner table. There's no dinner table emergencies that you have to have access to your phone if somebody texts. And putting those into place and showing and doing the work makes a huge difference when it comes to our children believing us and being able to implement those things into their lives as well.
Well, and I even realized, my son said to me a couple weeks ago, he's like, Mama, you're always on your phone. And I was like, I'm actually not. And I was like, look, only 2 hours a day
Right.
when I showed it to him. And he's like, yeah, but you're always on the phone when I want to talk to you. And so he was interpreting it as I'm always on my phone. And so then I realized, okay, when you walk in the room to talk to me, I'm going to put it down.
Totally.
Unless I can't, because I'm responding to something, and I'll explain what I'm doing and then put it down. So I realized even if you're quote unquote not on your phone a lot, they could still be interpreting that you are, and that's what they're learning.
Right.
And so I really had to be intentional about, okay, so you are going to want to always be on your phone then from seeing me. So
That
yeah.
struck me. Our 5-year-old drew a picture of me, and like I'd come up to their bedroom to tell her to go to sleep, and she had a picture of me with my phone in my hand, and I was like, oh,
Yes.
she sees me with my phone in my hand, even though my screen time things, make me feel good that I'm only on this many
Yes.
hours per day. They see that,
Right.
and then those are their experiences with you. And so if we can be intentional about putting it down
Yep.
before we interact, or saying, hold on, I just need 1 minute, I have to return this, and then I'm going to give you my full attention, and actually doing that, then that makes a huge difference for our children to feel heard and to feel your presence, but also to model responsible-ish screen time use.
Right, and also how to interact in person, right?
Yeah.
So that you're not just listening, you're like half listening to people when you're on your phone. Absolutely.
Well, I think also some apps are okay to use. I think social media apps, if you're at the dinner table, if it's important, someone will call you, all right? No one's gonna text you on Instagram if it's that important. So if you're on the dinner table and someone is calling you, then your kids should be learning that calls are okay. Calls are okay because that's important. That's important work. Someone's calling you because they need something right this instant. But if it's a text, you don't text someone when it's urgent. If your leg's broken, you're not going to text someone like, hey, my leg's broken. You're going to call them because you're in pain.
Right.
So I think kids also need to learn the fact that like some apps are okay.
Yeah,
You guys
I think you can learn the nuances, right? Like you said, if somebody's calling, well, then I can understand why I would get my phone out at the dinner table. But if it's a notification that came in that somebody liked my post on Instagram, I'm not going to pull my phone out at the dinner table to look at that, and I should probably just turn my notifications off so that I'm not constantly getting pinged and distracted.
About that, notifications are also very heavily affecting children. Like, they don't need to be notified about every single thing that's happening. Like, oh, there's a new trend, I'm notified about that. I mean, back in your guys' day, trends and what was cool was shared by word of mouth.
Sure.
And I think, the negative effects of a kid not having a phone completely, yes, that's true. Like them not knowing what's going on, them being under a rock beneath earth and not being able to associate with other children and what they like is totally bad. But for them to have a phone and be able to know like, hey, this was cool, but then they're off the phone and being able to do other stuff, they're still able to communicate with other people, their peers, what was cool or what's trending or what people are doing now, And with having no phone, I learned all my trends from my dad. I liked old school hip hop and I would share that to other kids. And it made me feel like an outsider, but other kids learned that from their parents. And I mean, parents showing their kids trends, if all parents did that, then all kids are gonna like the same trends.
Sure.
Yeah, well, and so we've been talking a little bit about technology personally, and Dr. Vivek Murthy, when he was here, was talking about how we really need to protect the learning environment too. And you talked about how kids are definitely getting around the Chromebook, right, policies and stuff. But I'm curious, so I just went to a no personal electronics policy in my college classrooms because I realized how much the moment people were bored, they just got on social media and were doing something and checked out of class, even in the mental health communication class when we were talking about it. And so I decided to only keep it for learning activities when we're working on something. And then the classroom environment has improved immensely. But so I'm curious how it worked at LPS for you in your last year.
So I think LPS did a wonderful job first quarter and second quarter with putting their foot down on it. I think as any teacher would, they get frustrated when kids are constantly getting mad at them about this new change. And kids are constantly going to be getting mad about a new change. Sure. But it's important that this step continues for the next generation so they get used to that. If you grow someone up on this certain method, they're going to continue with that method, So I think it was great during the first and second quarter. third and fourth quarter, I could see leniencies. And that's not to be like LPS wasn't doing their best. It's just, you know, as a teacher, if you're getting yelled at by students and parents who don't agree with this change, you know, you're going to get tired of enforcing it. You don't want to be yelled at every single day at work. So I think it's important that parents are on the side of the teachers on this. Because the teachers are just wanting what's best for us students, which is to learn. That's what we're there at school for, to learn.
Right. I heard from a lot of teams that they actually appreciated the policy. It seemed like at first it was going to be a huge drag and that people weren't going to do it, but then they did find like, oh, there is a benefit to this. And if everybody can't access it, then it's not just me that's missing out. Everybody's missing out. And so it's not as big of a deal to miss out if the whole class has to put their phones away and can't be on their personal electronics. Like, it's not like you're missing out then. It's just you're participating and everybody's participating, and the internet will be there when class is over, when the school day's over. You're going to be able to catch up on the things that you missed rather than having that constant stream of information that just is constantly, you know, giving you these little dopamine hits and pings of information that then you're just drawn back to again and again.
Well, I think what really convinced me to do it, I'd been thinking about it for years, and what completely convinced me to do it this past semester was that the mental health argument, and that when students are focusing, when we're all focusing on one thing at a time, rather than constantly getting the dopamine hits or the switch tasking back and forth where our stress levels are increasing continuously, it just doesn't, one, it doesn't model how should we be acting for mental health purposes, but then secondly, how can we actually be learning and focusing just on one thing at a time?
Yeah.
And so the mental health argument was particularly really strong for me. Okay, and so right now, I was just wondering if you had any final thoughts that you wanted to share, anything I didn't ask that you think is really important for the audience to know before we go to Q&A.
I think the whole thing about phones and mental health is a big issue, but I also think the fact that we're implementing so many electronics in schools is a big issue also. I think Chromebooks are a great source, a great tool for students to learn, but when they're on Chromebooks 24/7, you know, it gets tiring. They get kind of complacent and bored when you're looking at a screen all day. So I think it's important for schools to also implement hands-on classing periods, or periods where you're learning something with your hands. You're not looking at a screen. You're looking at a teacher. I know with the aviation facility that we had at North Star, it was a hands-on class. We didn't have a Chromebook. And if that's in the middle of my day, you know, I'm complacent, but then I get that dopamine rush of, oh, I'm pitting a panel on a plane, or I'm changing the engine out, you know, something that's getting my hands moving, my blood flowing, you know. So I think it's important that we also limit electronics, even if they're tools, at school also.
I think for me, one of the things that I despair about a little bit when it comes to social media and screens is that it really has to be a local effort to change things, because the social media companies have no interest in making it harder for teens to get on social media, and they have so much internal research and data supporting that they know that mental health is affected and body image issues and self-harm and all these things are worsened by their apps, but they don't do anything to change it. And we haven't had any meaningful legislation at the national level since 1998 with the Child Online Protection Act. That was before iPhones even. It was when we were still on AOL Instant Messenger. That was the last time that there was any meaningful legislation. And so we can't count on somebody to come and save us from this. It really has to be something that we do as a parent, a child, a family, a school, and a community, that we're going to say, this isn't working for us and we need to do something different, rather than waiting for somebody else to come and figure it out for us or help us, because there's just too much weight against it, because there's too much money pouring in against it to change things.
Absolutely. And so I just want to thank you both for sharing your perspectives. And so we're going to now turn it over to the Q&A section. So if folks on Zoom, please feel free. I know some folks are writing questions in. Feel free as they come up to share them in the chat, and then we will do our best to answer them. So Julio, I have a question for you. So how do you think kids are different in how they're communicating online versus offline?
I think it's a complete difference. As he was saying, when you're on your little phone, you know, when no one's looking at you, there becomes sort of an iron curtain, as you would say, a strength of like, I can say anything. No one's gonna find out. I can be as negative, as hurtful as I wanna be. I can say the most rudest things, the most horrific things, and no one will find out. But as soon as my phone goes away, I'm back to, I'm a great child. I have nothing wrong to say. I'm doing the best I can.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you're online, a sort of like a fake perception of no one will find out is there. And the thing is, you can say all these horrific things, you can say all these mean things, but once someone finds out, you know, then everyone's hating on you, and then that whole, you plummet, you're depressed, and then that's where we get kids killing themselves.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can't, parents need to teach their kids, even though you're saying this, even though you're on a different account, you can still get found out. You can, people can still find out what you're saying and find out who said this or who did this on an Instagram or social media. And it's important for kids to learn that just because it's social media, you can't say everything, you know? You can't say anything, you can't be a troll, you can't be hurtful. It's just like real life. If you wouldn't say it to someone's face, why would you say it over a message?
So then, Dr. Boucher, based on that, I have a question for you. So how can parents meaningfully, I know you mentioned the screen limits,
Sure.
but, right, so my son has Messenger Kids, and so we can see everything that he's texting. So we talk about things with him as we see things coming up, and so we're hoping that we're socializing him with how to act, right, when he becomes a teenager. But how do you balance then, when they are teenagers, between trust, but then also making sure you're involved enough to understand when
Right.
things are going to be problematic?
I think one of the biggest issues is, as Julio said, you know, you can be very different online than in person, and it's so much easier. I mean, just look at the Facebook comment sections of anybody. It's so much easier to be extreme and to speak in more aggressive language and to say things that you would never say face to face when it's online, even if it's not anonymous, even if it's just you on your account. And so what I think we need to do is, as parents, if we can model, what do you think this person means when they say this? What do you think would be an appropriate response? When you said this before, I'm not sure that that came across as you intended. If you're going to allow your child to have those direct messages with other kids in any sort of capacity online, it would be good to kind of debrief after the fact, because so much is lost digitally that we don't understand the nuance and we don't understand the tone that doesn't come through, that if we can help our children to recognize that, then it will help them when they go to text somebody or when they go to DM someone or whatever it might be, to have a little bit more wherewithal that, okay, I need to make sure and say that this way so it doesn't come across differently, since we're not face to face and I can't observe their body language and the way that they're taking it and all those sorts of things. That those are things that we need to make sure that we're practicing with our child, so that they get comfortable with online digital communications.
Thank you so much. Okay, and so we also had a question from the audience, which is, what are policy or systemic changes that can happen in Lincoln to protect youth's mental health when it comes to screen time?
I'll put it this way. When Dr. Murthy had our independent circle with us, he had just came from France. And in France, what they do is they put their phones in a bucket at the beginning of the day. They don't get their phones till the end of the day. Lincoln should get to that point. Even though there's lunch, even though we're at the point where it's just lunch or just when you're passing period, Lincoln as a city should get to the point where phones are put in a bucket at the beginning of the day and you get it at the end of the day. If it's truly important for a parent to call their child, they have phones at the office. People will get to them, you know? There's no need at all for a phone to be in class. You have a Chromebook as your tool to learn. You know, your phone's not helping you learn, your phone's getting you distracted. So I think implementing wise, we should take from other countries and what they're doing, and France is doing an excellent job with that.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense to just like to scale things up. We at LPS said, you know, you can't have it in the classroom, and then let's just extend that out a little bit more. And I think those are ways that we can, as a community, put policies in place and see the benefits. I would love to see what this data shows after a year or after 5 years of doing this, you know, in terms of our local mental health, because I don't think nationally we're going to make a big dent in things. But we can certainly help here. And I think it really would make a difference if there was more discussion in the schools with parents on how to actually put these practices into place. Because it's great to say, don't let your kid on social media. And I do that, like I write about that on my social media and everything like that. But it's really hard when parents are pitted against their child and pitted against their child's friends,
Right.
parents really.
Right.
And so if we can have more ongoing conversations about what we are actually doing and what's working for us, then it will make a big difference when it comes to everybody collectively deciding this is not worth it. This is not in our best interest of our children or our community.
Thank you. And so another question is, Lincoln now has the lowest youth aerobic fitness rates in history. Do you think this is related to social media use?
I think it's related not just to social media use, but all electronic use. I mean, most kids need to get outside. I mean, when I was a kid, because I didn't have a phone, I was enlisted in all sports. No matter if I didn't like it or not, it was my parents' mission to find something that stuck with me. And skateboarding was that thing. I skateboard on an average probably about 2 hours a day. That's 2 hours of me being outside, doing exercise. There's all sorts of fitness places in Lincoln. I mean, kids can find something they like. It's just up to the parents to put them out there. To be like, hey, we're not doing anything this Friday. How about as a family, let's go rock climbing. Maybe their new thing is rock climbing. They want to boulder. We have 3 rock climbing sites in Lincoln, and it's a great exercise. I went on it once. My arms were tore. So I think all electronic-wise, when kids are just stuck on their electronics, they can't go outside. They can't see what's going on. I know when I was introduced to the TV and games, my parents gave us a 1 hour limit every day. 1 hour, that's what we got every day. If that 1 hour was done, like you said, it's all right. Now I know I'm just done with the electronic. I need to go outside and do something. Go bike around. Go get hurt. Go get in trouble. Scrape your knee, Do something that any kid would do.
Yeah, I think we live in a very safe age, and yet it feels like things are so dangerous that we can't let our child go outside and go around the block unattended. When, if we look at the actual statistics, it's never been safer to be a child in the United States. And so we as parents often get very fixated on keeping our child safe in the real world, but we don't pay any attention to being safe online. And we allow them to be online so much more because of that fear that something bad is going to happen. They're going to be abducted or taken advantage of or something along those lines if they're out in the real world. And so relating that to fitness, I think one of the things that we see is that when we have the default of being on our screens, then of course we're not going to go outside. Of course we're not going to ride our bike or just go find something to do. When you said, get in trouble, it made me think of The Sandlot when the mom sends the kid out and says, go scrape your knee, go get hurt, go get into trouble. Not a lot of trouble, but a little trouble. And I think if we can somehow come back to that, then we will see fitness rates improve. And I think that is one thing that it's really been hard, especially with the pandemic, just how much worse aerobic fitness has got just in the past 4 years, that we have a long way to improve now. And if we can limit screen time, then the kids are going to find something to do. And one of those things is just getting out and moving their bodies, and that will improve aerobic fitness, even without signing up for a select baseball team or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I really realized, so I have a great group of neighbors in my neighborhood, and so we collectively agreed there are certain hours of the day where the kids just won't be on screens and they'll be out playing, right? And so it really helps because my son knows, the other kids aren't going to be on it either that I want to play with, so we have no choice but to be outside. But then the moment they get bored, they'll each go to all of us, respective parents, and then say, could we just have screens outside? But we'll be outside. I was like, no, you have to be running around, right? And so we're like, no, not yet, not until the evening, right? And so
that makes such a huge difference if everybody is on the same page, because if not, then they can just go to one kid's house that lets them do Nintendo Switch or Minecraft or whatever it might be, or they feel like the one that's left out or the only one that isn't getting to do it, and then they're going to be resentful. But if everybody's on the same page, and if we have a little community of like-minded parents that have made that decision, then what are they going to do? They're going to go outside and play or find things to do or get into a little bit of trouble figuring out how the world works.
Exactly, and I find that more parents feel this way than not, and so I feel like there are more advocates out there for this type of communal, right, rule setting than people would think. So yeah.
But I think also that's a great, wonderful way to do it. It's also up to parents to find out what their kid's passion is. At the end of the day, once they find that passion, they're not going to want to be on that phone. They're going to want to do that passion 24/7 all day. Go outside was my passion. Skating was my passion. So skating was all I did every single day. But my parents, and there's neighbors on my street. I know a neighbor that built a rock climbing treehouse for their son. And they didn't just do it for their son, they did it with their son. So it wasn't just, oh, I'm going to do this for you so you can do it. They taught their son something. Their son was outside building a structure out of wood. You know, they give skills, that gives another passion that could grow out, carpentry, perhaps. So it's up to parents to, oh, you want to play basketball? How about let's not buy a basketball hoop, let's build a basketball hoop with you. You know, that's a good, fun teaching moment, you know, for students and kids all alike.
Well, I think parents too are so overwhelmed with life, and there's just so many things on everyone's to-do list, and so many different anxieties and worries as an adult that we face and fear, that it creates a certain level of apathy when it comes to screens, because our children aren't demanding to be entertained in the same way because they have their iPad or their phone or their computer or Minecraft or whatever it is, that they don't demand those things of us, like figure out how to entertain me or help me figure out how to entertain myself. The lowest common denominator is just getting on the screens, and then the kids aren't causing a lot of trouble. And then we as adults are able to get things done. And so that works against us as adults, that it's such a good tool for getting stuff done. I try and talk with parents especially about different times of day and the different demands on us as parents and how we can use screens in those moments. If you're coming home from school or daycare or whatever it might be, and your 3-year-old is just a hot mess and we need to get dinner on the table, let's use some iPad time then, so that we can show up then at the dinner table and be present as a parent, because we've had a little moment to recharge and rest our brains and not be constantly being yelled at by our toddler. But then let's pick other times of day where we're intentionally not going to have screens available. Like you said that you and the people that your neighbors do, is we're having times where we're not going to have access to screens. It's hard to not, the slippery slope though of getting back into screens. We have a 3-year-old who, I don't know, it must have been a bad morning that we let her have her iPad at breakfast, and then it became this, she would say, iPad, juice, headphones, and that would be her sign, like, and then yummy toast. And so that meant that she wanted her iPad, she wanted her headphones on, and she wanted her yummy toast, and we just got into that habit. And then, like, it made the mornings a little bit smoother. And so it intentionally took saying, okay, we're not going to do this anymore. We're going to redirect. And it didn't take that many days to get off of it, but it feels like it's a big thing to then pull those reins back. But what I find is children are really quick to adjust to the new norms. And even if it hurts for 2 days when we say we're only going to have an hour of Minecraft per day, or we did let you have TikTok on your phone and we realized the error of our ways and we want to take TikTok off your phone, they're going to quickly adjust, and it's not going to be as big of a thing to undo those choices that we previously made. I think that's something that parents really fear, is like the going backwards or changing your mind, but we change our minds all the time.
Right.
And so we should feel comfortable, and we should feel like we can model changing our minds as parents, like, hey, I have new information. Maybe this isn't such a good idea to have you have access to this because I've learned this. So we're going to move this back a few notches of what you were previously allowed to do.
Yeah, one of the metaphors I've heard, and we actually explain it to our son when we're explaining, oh, we went a little too far and now it's time to come back, is the rubber band metaphor in parenting, where we just slowly stretch the boundaries and then we realize too far, and then we come back, and then it's really easy for him to understand that what we're doing. So yeah, I really love that. Okay, so we have another question, which is, how does smartphone use before bed impact sleep, which is so important to learning? So interested in the medical perspective, but then also, right, personal perspective too.
Yeah, I mean, sleep is a huge part of growing and developing, and if sleep is impacted, then it impacts our performance at school. It impacts the way that we communicate with the people that we love. When we're tired, we're grouchier, and that comes through in the way that we communicate with people. And it affects the performance of us in our daily lives. And so getting good sleep is really important, and smartphones One, just from the notification standpoint, if you're constantly getting notified and somebody else is up at 11 o'clock and they're sending you a message and you have those notifications, you're going to be up at 11 o'clock or 2 o'clock or 4 o'clock or whatever it might be when you're getting those notifications. And if you've posted something online and somebody comments on it at 3 in the morning because they're awake and you get that ding, then you're going to be up and you're going to be seeing what's going on. It's going to raise your blood pressure, especially if it was a negative comment. There's lots of things just from the notification standpoint. And then when we look at light exposure in the late evening, our brains have been developing for millions and hundreds of millions of years to know that when it gets dark, we go to sleep because there's nothing else to do once it got dark before lights, and electricity and everything like that. And so what we're doing is we're telling our brains it's still bright out. And so then when we actually do say, okay, fine, I'm finally going to put my phone away and I'm going to go to sleep, then your brain is not ready for that. It hasn't made that transition. And so what we need to do is make sure in the evenings that we're having a period of time before bed where for our teens and for our younger children, we have no huge ambient light sources that are going to make it difficult to fall asleep. And if we're going right up until the point of bed where they're allowed their iPad or Minecraft or whatever, not only from a light perspective, but also from being an engaged and activated perspective, like it's going to take time to calm back down after playing Minecraft before we go to bed or watching Jake and the Neverland Pirates or whatever it might be. We need time between when those end and when we go lay down in bed to actually let our minds relax into bedtime. And if we don't do that, then we're going to be fighting with our kids and they're going to be yelling and there's going to be big feelings. And then oftentimes we're just going to say, fine, just here's your iPad. Please, I cannot take it anymore. Here's your iPad. And then it just creates that vicious cycle and it's hard to get out of that.
What I would say about that is it's completely right. It's true. I mean, my girlfriend started college this year, and while I was in high school, and she was doing a lot of doing all-nighters. I didn't think that was a true thing, but I guess in college, your first year, you do all-nighters.
I wouldn't recommend it, but yes.
And when she would wake up in the morning, she was grouchy, she was mean, she'd say hurtful things, and I'd have to take it as she doesn't mean this, she just didn't get any sleep.
Right.
And like she didn't get any sleep, and she's waking up in the morning, it's like, oh, I have to go to psychology now. This is gonna suck. And I think the first semester that she had, where she didn't get the right sleep, she didn't make a studying schedule, she was on her phone and on her computer studying all night, she failed that semester. She failed all the classes. And it showed her that, you have to get right sleep to pass. And then this semester, she got sleep, she did everything right, she passed all her classes. So I don't know what better proof that is that you just need your sleep. And having phones and laptops before sleep and not getting the right sleep is gonna decline your studies.
Well, so in our house, we have the no screens for an hour before you go to bed. Both Matt and I, my husband and I, both do that too, then to model that for Luke. But we still charge our phones in our bedroom. And so the first thing we do when we wake up, right, is check it. And so we want to start modeling for Luke already, even though he doesn't have a phone, like how that should be. So we just talked about getting analog alarm clocks.
Right, they still make those.
Right,
Can you believe
exactly. And then moving our phones to the kitchen for where they'll be charged overnight. So yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, that's the thing that I always, teens often bring up is like, it's my alarm clock.
Yes.
Go on Amazon.
Right.
You're going to be
so
shocked.
easy.
There's this like little box that tells you the time and you can set an alarm on it, and it's $8.
But like how many of the parents are doing it,
oh,
right?
for sure.
And so it's
Guilty.
like we can stop doing that too, yeah.
Yep, for sure.
So then this is a great question. How do parents detox from the illusion that phones provide a needed and constant proximity to their children?
Ooh, that's tricky. I think my assumption from that question is that it's the idea that I need to give my child a phone so that I can get in touch with them if something were to come up. Is that
Yes.
okay?
Yep.
So I think it's hard because we live in a world where you don't know if you're sending your child off to school and something bad could happen to them. And it's an unfortunate fact of our country that happens, school shootings and everything like that. You want a way to be able to connect with your child. I think what it takes is realizing, okay, if something were to happen, they're surrounded by other adults. And the other adults are going to be able to communicate in a much more efficient way, in a much better way than my child is in the heat of whatever moment it might be. It takes realizing that we're sending our child off to school with a bunch of helpers and people that love and care about our child. And it's okay if we don't have direct access to them over text message or over phone call. And if we do feel like we need that, that doesn't mean we have to give them a smartphone. We can choose something that is a lesser, access to the internet and all those sorts of things. It could be a watch.
Right.
It could be a flip phone.
I love the
something
flip phone
along
idea.
those lines, where you say, okay, I don't need to have constant contact with my child, but I do want them to have access to me, or I do need to be able to communicate with them if something changes and they're getting a different ride, or something along those lines. That might be something where you say, I need to be able to communicate with my child. Well, we can do that without an iPhone. We're able to communicate those things. Or we can just call the school and say, hey, can you pass this message along, like we did in the olden days.
Or
when it
even
was-
in elementary school.
Right.
We still do that.
Exactly.
I do that. Yeah.
So those are things that we can do, and if we just kind of make that the standard and make it a little bit more difficult to communicate, then our child will understand, and they will also figure out how to get a message to mom or dad if the need arises. Like, I don't have to go text them. I can go tell the teacher, hey, I need to let my mom know something. Or I can go to the office and say, can I call my parent? Those are things that we can still do.
And so I don't know, Julio, if you have anything to add to that, how sometimes the resistance is from the parents, right?
I just have to say, I think parents have grown up on the times now where Find My is a thing, and they know their child's constant location. My parents didn't grow up on Find My. They grew up on word of mouth from the teachers in the office and my flip phone. I was totally fine. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm at school. There's people there to help you. There's people there to keep you safe. We do live in those scary times. There has been a couple threats of shooting at my school, once or twice. Those are scary days. But we're safe there. There's people there to protect you. I think, though, we needed to come back from that time of not having that threat at school. Once that threat at school is gone, I think most parents can feel at ease about not sending their child to school without a phone.
Yeah, it's hard because I think
Yeah.
social media adds fuel to that fire of we live in a super dangerous world, and if I'm not constantly surveilling my child, something bad could happen, and I need to be able to constantly contact them. I think we should be making it harder at the family level to communicate as easily as we do. Sometimes my 7-year-old will be watching on Find My to see when I'm coming home and all those sorts of things, or they will text me from upstairs and be like, hey, our 8-year-old just texted this morning, like, I want 2 pieces of toast, not 1 piece of toast, please. And I'm like, no, this is not how we do things as a family. We don't need to use the Amazon Alexas to communicate from room to room.
Right.
We don't need to constantly be monitoring. I see lots of people sharing like videos from inside their house. I don't think we should have all these video cameras and watching and constant contact. We should make it a little bit more difficult, that at least if you need to tell me that you want 2 pieces of toast instead of 1 piece of toast, that you walk down the stairs or yell over the banister or something along those lines. And we should apply that to our communications with our child outside of the home too. It doesn't have to be that easy for us to get in contact with them or them with us, and it's going to help them to problem solve. And hey, you figured it out. You realized that I wasn't at school and that your grandma was picking you up from school.
Right.
Nice job. How did you figure that out? Oh, you saw their car. Like, if you model those things and if you show them and help them do that work, then it will give them more self-confidence and self-esteem that, oh, I figured that out. Like, I didn't have constantly somebody on my phone that was giving me step-by-step directions. I was able to figure out what was going on without that constant source of, I think they're going to mess it up. I need to be constantly in contact with them to make sure they get it right. That doesn't increase our self-confidence. It makes us feel more dependent.
Right.
And it makes us feel like I'm going to mess it up if somebody isn't constantly watching and surveilling me and making sure that I get it right.
Yeah, I really like that connection to increasing self-esteem and self-confidence and how to navigate and problem solve the world. And so there was a question for me that said, what do I hear from college students about their mental health and screens? So I hear a lot, and I think it mirrors a lot of what you're saying. Like, you would think by college it would improve, but I think because it's often the first time of independence, it actually worsens, I think, for a lot. And so I hear it in a couple different ways. So I think by far the worst that a lot talk about is when they first get to college. And so particularly with social media, it's that you immediately become friends with everyone in your class, right? And so that's designed to create community. But consistently my students have told me that what you're really looking at is other people hanging out within your class when you're not doing it. And so you feel that loneliness, what it's designed to do is to decrease loneliness, and consistently students are telling me it actually is increasing loneliness, right? And so then what does that do? That makes them want to get on their screens more to talk to their friends who aren't on campus, right? Instead of engaging in person on campus because they feel they're the only ones feeling that way. And so I would say definitely loneliness is a huge issue on college campuses, which Dr. Murthy had talked about, and I see it in all of my classes. And still, even though we know that, students even in my class are really surprised when they talk to each other that they're not the only one. So even though logically they know, emotionally they have a hard time feeling that they're not the only ones.
Right.
And so it's really interesting to hear that.
I think it's just that fear of like you've grown up on phones. All your friends are social medially out there. You know, you're not used to making friends in high school or communicating. But if no one has a phone in high school, everyone's going to communicate with everyone. So it's up to the parents to get their parents to get their kids to communicate with their peers, so when they get to college, it's not so hard to communicate with their peers.
Well, and consistently, they're also telling me the second biggest way is that they are very uncomfortable in-person conversations with people they don't know, right? And so Dr. Murthy talked about that. And so I'm lucky I have a communication class, so I can build into the structure that based on what we're talking about, you're going to work in teams and you're going to talk about this, right? And you're going to work through the different parts of a conversation, right? And all this stuff. And so that they can practice. But they basically said what Dr. Murthy said, where they're like, you know, if you're sitting somewhere, like let's say at a dining hall table, and you don't know the people who are sitting with you, everyone picks up their phone to avoid talking to each other, right? And so even if they want to, other people have their phone. And so then it just is this reinforcing cycle where people just aren't talking to each other and all the communication is online. And so, yeah, I think the more we're talking about this and the more we have classes about this, right, the more that's out there, people are becoming aware and they're starting to set those limits on themselves. Like some of my students were talking about that they're setting the limits for themselves. I'm just going to be an hour on social media today and that's it, right? And it helps for them to know, to decrease that stigma that it's not just them, which is what they feel very intensely, that it's just them. So yeah. Okay, so what resources are there for parents, youth, and community members to learn more or to take action on this issue? We have a couple minutes left.
Oh gosh, there's a lot of good resources online. I think there's one place that I go, there's a Substack author, Catherine Price, who wrote a book, How to Break Up with Your Phone, and a couple other books. And I turn to her frequently for all of the resources. But what I think parents need to do is be talking amongst each other. How did you figure this out? How did you figure this out? And if we can have that vulnerability of like, hey, my kid's on their phone too much, or my child is on Minecraft all the time, or those sorts of things. How did you solve that? Then that can be really helpful for families. I try and do like some workshops and some videos and things on how to set up those screen time settings, because it's a lot of like, how do I actually click to set this up? And there's lots of really good resources. I mean, you can just look it up on YouTube as well to find those good resources, but it does take a little bit of time to then sit down with your child's device and set those things up. And so that is where I think it often falls apart. Like, oh, I meant to do this, but then I got stuck and I didn't know their Apple ID password, and then 6 weeks or 6 months went by and I didn't actually ever set up their screen time settings or anything along those lines. So I think it does take some intentionality, but finding out from others how they've done that can be really helpful. Common Sense Media is a great place to find media recommendations and like what's appropriate in those regards. But then I think talking with your child's teachers, pediatrician, a therapist if they have one, about like what can we actually do to put some practices in place that are going to help my child is a really great way to find those resources.
Do you have any advice for parents based on your experience?
No, I mean, he said pretty much everything that I would go to. My parents really didn't grow up doing that because we didn't have the phone. So I never really saw how they could affect that, but I would listen to him. He's the pediatrician there.
I think that's the hard thing too, is like none of us grew up with it. This is all new territory. And so we're having to undo a lot of the work that we allowed to have happen, and it's not our fault. I mean, much bigger entities than us has been trying to make things turn out the way that they have when it comes to all of the money that's spent trying to get people on their phones and keep them on their phones, then now we're having to undo those things, and it's taking a lot of intentionality, just getting into the dirt and figuring it out.
Yeah, and it really gives me hope. I think there a couple years ago, I felt like, is anything making a difference with this, right? And I think in the last couple of years, I've been really able to see not only youth, but it's college students, parents, families really coming together to really talk about this, the more information that's out there. So it does give me hope that we're starting to move in the right direction. And so we're coming to a close right now, so I just wanted to just let everybody know, I know there were a lot of questions that we didn't have time to get to, and so Community Health Endowment is committed to continuing this conversation, so please stay tuned on what's next. And thank you, everybody. Thank you to our panelists for being here, and thank you, everybody on Zoom, for joining us today as well.